Well, good afternoon. Today is March 24th, 2023. My name is Kemal Erkan. I'm the chairman of United Medical ACO. This is UMACO TV. So this is our weekly event, and we have one of our guests who was with us, I believe, at end of October or maybe early November, right before the election.
Right before the election.
Our new state auditor, Lydia York, is with me. Lydia, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. I'm doing well, and thank you for having me back.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you here. And last time when we were talking, it was right before the election, and we were trying to understand what your plans were and what you were expecting. Now you had the job, you took over in January, right?
That's correct.
So now it's almost 2 months. So how is everything going?
Well, it's going perhaps not as I was perhaps optimistic in my assessment of what was occurring and happening, but I try to stay optimistic, and I describe it as every day being Christmas, because every day we get to open a new package and find out something that I did not know about the office previously. Some of those surprises are good. Some of them are not great. But I think
surprises then.
which is what makes it all, as I said, still a little bit of the Christmas spirit going here, because every day I do learn something new and interesting, and it's like, gee, how did I not know that of effect? So it's as they say, you don't know what you don't know. One of the things that I think I understood but didn't really understand it was that there is not very much institutional memory in the department.
Interesting.
There's only one person who was present during the Wagner administration. Okay, so managed to get all the way through the immediate past administration. There was only one person who was there for all of that. So we have an opportunity to rebuild on a truly clean slate. But as a concept, there's some norms, I think, that we are working on reestablishing in the department in terms of how we connect with other folks in state government, in terms of how we work among ourselves, and in terms of how we're going to go about our work. I did find a thoroughly professional and motivated staff, anxious to do their work and to grow and learn in their various capacities. So that was a great.
So are you able to hire your own team, or did you have to work with the existing team?
Some of the folks in the department are what we call merit employees in the state. Mm-hmm. I don't have the ability to fire them, although I do have the ability to hire them. Okay. But the most striking thing was that we are understaffed. And so one of my primary, it's not an initiative, it's one of my priorities is to address that. Mm-hmm. And addressing that is, let's just say it's a multidisciplinary effort, because we have to make sure we have the funding in place, should we hire people, that we've got the work for them to do, that they're going to get the training that they need, if in terms of the systems that we need to access, and then to be effective, efficient, economical auditors for the state. So that's a little bit of a work in progress. Sure. When I made my presentation to the Joint Finance Committee, I had to regretfully report to them we had 7 vacancies. And we have total positions available of 28, and we were down at 21. So it was important that we both stabilize and secure the funding that we need to hire the people to do the work.
The work that you do it requires a lot of manpower, right? Because auditing is not the easiest thing to do, and you have to go over everything that audit has happened in certain standards. So then
it is. Yeah, and so it can be labor intensive, but the mechanisms in place today, there's a lot of data file sharing, broadly speaking, we generally would simply get access to the underlying systems to be able to do our testing in that fashion. So there's a lot of, we'll evaluate the system of internal controls, go back and figure out what we need to sample to validate to validate a particular control or the number that it's producing, and proceed from there. But the truth is, we were sort of budgeted for 3 complete audit teams, and we really only had 2. So it's it's my priority currently is to recruit folks. In that regard, we have gotten permission from the state to offer signing bonuses for our open positions, and we're hoping that will help out a bit. We have most recently, in fact, just Wednesday of this week, I have appointed a deputy auditor who was actually previously on staff. So people ought to know that I do have a preference for hiring from within, but if we don't, then if we can't, then we won't. But that there is a career path inside the auditor's office is what I want to emphasize there.
So, your position is kind of unique in a way that you don't report to anyone.
That's correct.
Right.
I have a great deal of liaison with the state legislature, and I do interact with other parts of government, but broadly, strictly speaking, we are the sort of the last stop.
So that's actually really cool.
It is kind of cool.
You have to answer the governor, right? So,
well, strictly speaking, the governor's office is on our list of auditees on occasion. So, because they especially in the most recently, they had control of a fair amount of the COVID-related funding. So we had to sort of come back and go through the governor's office for a little bit. So, but we are part of the state system. Okay, we're not just off in an island unto ourselves.
No, I didn't mean independent in that way, but I meant
right.
You don't.
But I don't report to anyone.
Yeah, that's important. Like not reporting, so that means you are able to do your job without any pressure. Now, going back to the technical part of actually, before we go to that,
sure.
If I can ask you, like your what happens? How did your day change? Like this was before January, now after January.
How did my day change?
A day in the life of state auditor. So how is it different now?
I think the most significant difference for me personally is that I now have to go to work. Okay. Previously, I was a solo practitioner practicing out of my home. My previous commute was down the hall, and now I've got to get in the car and go somewhere. And so now I'm like using the car and buying gas and running up Easy Pass tolls. But that's I would say that's the single most significant difference between before and now. Now, I am far more conscious, and always have been, but far more conscious of the example I set. Okay, both in terms of demeanor and how one approaches problems, how one deals with difficulties. So that's something that I am conscious and aware of. Mostly because I think I might have said it previously, the staff had been through it, and they deserved better leadership. And I hope to be able to provide that, but in any means necessary. And among those is modeling, good behavior, basically. So
now, if you were to go to the technical part of it, so last time when we had our discussion, when I did some research, and after you also kind of went over those responsibilities between the healthcare related expenditures and the school system, that represents almost 65 to 70% of the total of state budget, which probably consumes most of your time. Now, I know you have done or you have started the school district audit, I guess, right?
Well,
do they just audit, or do they also need approval from you?
So there's a couple different mandates as it relates to, there's more than a couple actually, as it relates to the school districts. The most significant mandate that was going unfulfilled was the audit of the local funds, meaning the tax receipts that they pull in through tax receipts and how that gets spent inside their system. That was an audit that I think finally got started, frankly, toward the end of the last administration. And but it was the first time it had happened in a very long time. And it felt new to everybody, from large to small, and the vendor that we were using to help us achieve that, it all felt like we'd never ever done it before, when the objective reality is it had just simply been some time. I think that once the audit was completed and we were able to share, the reports with the folks, with the various school districts, and walk them through what's going on, and to assure them, frankly, that we're there to help, to identify weaknesses, so that when they go, for example, to referendum on school taxes, that they'll be able to say, well, look, these are our financial statements. This is what we're doing. And we have, we've been audited, and we, if we had any weaknesses, we were addressing them, or we have a plan to address them. If we need more money, if we say we need more money, we really do. And so, I think it will improve and enhance their credibility when they go to referendum.
I see.
So that's an important
How
thing.
do you decide to audit them? Like, or are they, like, I'm assuming that there are some routine audits, but if outside of the routine audit, how do you decide to audit them?
Well, as it turns out, the school districts are one of our mandates, in that all 19 need to be audited every year for this. So that's kind of taken out of our hands. But in the areas where we do have discretion, or where we don't necessarily have as clear a mandate as we like, which would tell us when to do it, frankly, we will make a risk assessment, which is basically just trying to figure out, if things go wrong there, what's the maximum damage that it could occur? Okay, so every single program isn't going to get looked at every year, primarily because a lot of the programs are, in the grand scheme of things, in terms of materiality, relatively low dollar. Does that mean that they escape scrutiny? No, it just means that we will prioritize higher risk areas, and the lower risk areas basically are on a schedule of some sort, so that we get to them. We just might not get to them every year. And I'll use, for example, there, DHSS, the nursing homes. Okay, we don't do them all every year. They are on a rotating, while it's mandated that we look at them, the periodicity wasn't entirely clear. So what we've done is put them on a rotating schedule. And so over a 3-year cycle, we'll get to everyone.
I see. These nursing homes are the state-owned nursing homes?
The ones where they'll probably state-owned, as well as some of the primary, the places where folks who are receiving Medicaid benefits would end up. So they could be, relative, like I said, so it could be a relatively small footprint. If it's a nursing home that only has, say, a half dozen Medicaid beds, we're not going to get there every year, but we're going to get there 1 in 3, and then the chances are we're going to look at all 3 years.
I see.
Since we were last there, we're going to look at the documentation for the last 3 years.
So I want to ask you this question, but I'm trying to kind of see how I can actually make good sense. Now, I also own a surgery center. So for the licensing, we have to go through recertification. So that happens either every year or every 3 years based on the schedule you have. So then state will come in and they will go through everything. And if we do a good job, then we pass. Otherwise, we would do the corrections and all that. So it's kind of like a different type of audit almost.
Yes,
is the audit that you are doing, so that I can have a better understanding, you are not actually, like the way that IRS is auditing us, that's not the audit that you are doing, is that right?
That's correct. We are more interested in the flow of cash, money in and money out. Okay. And so, to expand on your example, the surgical center, if it was, a Medicaid patient, use your services, you billed Medicaid, you got paid. It's on some schedule, we would come in potentially and ask, okay, we would start with DHSS. Did the vendor provide all the information that they were to provide for reimbursement? Was the reimbursement correct? Did the correct payment go to the provider? Okay, so we might not show up at your surgical center, but we would see the flow of documentation between you and DHSS.
So I think the part that I was, where I was coming from is just understanding the logic of the audit. Is it for your entities, like for the school district, for example? So you're not really picking an entity and audit them, but you are really maybe recertifying what they have done?
Yeah, right. Everything we're doing, well, currently, because of our manpower limitations, we are focusing on what has already happened. Okay, so where we will hopefully evolve is into being a little more proactive and move into what are known broadly as performance audits. Okay, meaning that while we're concerned about the dollars, we're also looking after whether a particular process is actually as efficient as it could be. So that is something that we will need to evolve to, and it would be something on a more highly discretionary basis. So, and while it's not necessarily on a discretionary basis, I'm going to talk about the ARPA funds. Okay, that was special need, special use, but not necessarily specially controlled. And by that, I mean, it was expected that your existing controls will be sufficient to the task of distributing those money, that money based on the program parameters that were brought to you by that the federal government insisted on. Okay, so that's sort of one aspect of the audit. Was all the documentation in place when that occurred? A performance audit would then go back and not really being concerned with the dollar flow in and out. Was the process efficient? Was it being looked at 3 times when you could have gotten by with 2? Was the application set up in a way that would allow you to easily figure out if the program is hitting parameters? Okay, and as I said, that's somewhat more subjective. We try to, but right this second, we're probably not going to be able to get to that because we want to make sure that we're rounding out all of the mandates that are imposed, not so much on us, but on the auditees actually, but we want to fulfill all of our mandates, before we branch back out into the performance audit world.
I see. So now what happens when you find irregularities?
So when we find irregularities, the first thing will happen is we'll test to see if it's in fact irregular, because any system is going to kick out an error from time to time. The question we will have is it more likely that this will produce an error than it ought to? Okay, so, when you're processing, let's just say tens of thousands of transactions, you expect something will not be right somewhere in there. But if you're finding a higher rate than we would expect, say the normal rate would be, say, 1 in 10,000, but if we're finding 10 in 10,000, that suggests to us that because maybe we didn't test every single transaction, that we might be missing something. Moreover, the system itself is missing the fact that an error occurred. So that's what we would go in testing for. So if we find an error, we're going to go back and figure out, is it really just a oopsie, or is the system kicking out or permitting to be kicked? Is it really producing errors or permitting errors to go undisclosed, that it is an error.
Mhm.
If we can, we will test for that specifically, which usually involves expanding the test pool that we're looking at. And so if we find more of that, then that becomes for us a problem. That's a problem that we need to look at and figure out and understand why it's happening. Okay. And so if it's, say that the problem is this is happening because somebody is forgetting to check a box that they need to check periodically. Well, you need to make sure someone somewhere checks to make sure that box is checked. Okay, so sometimes it's just a sort of a system modification. It could also be that, well, gee, we didn't know we had to check that box. And so that's a different remediation. That's a different corrective action that needs to be taken. And then, as is typically, and I'll just say, what we're finding currently, because of the workforce has shrunk under COVID. That's an objective reality, I believe.
That's a big challenge.
And it's a challenge now to find and keep competent folk in various positions. Okay, so if there's constant turnover at a control point, by the time you identify it, figure out that there's a problem with the control, you figure out that it's, frankly, that it's someone, that's failing to provide the control environment. But then you find out the person's only been, before you showed up, the person was only there 2 months. They haven't fully, learned the system to the point where they can both be familiar with it and understand how to address any errors that might come to their attention. So that happens quite frequently now. And so, in some cases, in a department to be unnamed, they've had, I believe, 3 people in the last 18 months in a particular position that's helping us, that's kicking, that's not a weakness. It's a person that hasn't been trained up in the position. And once they get trained up, they leave. And so the new person comes in, is actually talking about things that happened before they got there. Yeah. And so, it becomes a different kind of finding, but, but that's sort of the give and take and the give and go of the control environment. And we're all experiencing that, across state government.
I see. Now, so wasn't sure if I want to bring this up or not, but just because it was in the news and prior to your election, the transition was a little bit different than what we were expecting because of the situation with the former auditor. Were there any follow-ups that you have to deal with or you had to initiate, or was it already in place that you have to follow through?
Well, I can't remember when exactly we had our last interview, but the day after conviction went final, the governor appointed Dennis Greenhouse, who was in fact a former state auditor. And he was able to, let's just be honest, clear away the most obvious banana peels. Okay, and so I'm grateful to him for that service, and he agreed to. He's part of my transition committee that's still functioning and ongoing. So as I said, the very worst of it was cleared up. But as I said, I think as I alluded earlier about the Christmas analogy, everything's not obvious in terms of what needed to be cleaned up. But as a general rule, and as I said, I was perhaps optimistic that I'd be able to figure all that out, in the first 60 days. While we don't get nasty surprises every day, we still get some pleasant surprises along the way, but every once in a while we still get a Simpsons dough, Okay, it's like you're like, oh man, really?
Well, that's why we have these entities positions, so then we can, it's always, what I see, not just in the state, but even in the private business. So we have to have mechanism in place for checks and balances and the transparency, and otherwise, this is just, I dealt with so many different people, so many different backgrounds, nationalities. I don't know if I told you this at our first meeting, but I'm actually working on a book. And then I work with an editor, and I had to, like, as we are going through different issues and writing about those, one of the things that he said, does this really happen? Like, did this really happen, or how can this happen? And I'm like, look, so let me just give you just the perspective of what I have every day, what I have to deal with. There's so many different type of people I have to deal with. So in your office, how many different type of people you have? He's like, well, 90% is one group. I'm like, see, like, you don't have much exposure. So the reason we have all these we have all these issues is because we have so many different type of people. So, and that's the only way that we can do is have good institutions like the way that our state auditor's office and others, to make sure that there's a good checks and balance and you trust and verify. So that's something that we always do in business. And I think it's a good business practice for state officials as well. And I know that you are going to be really good for this job. In fact, I thought you were going to be a little bit even overqualified for a job. And when I say this, I'm being again careful. So then I'm not, I don't want you to understand this in any different way. But I wonder if there was a motivation for this election, that you wanted to run and make sure that we have a proper person. But now what's next for you? Like, after this one, are you planning to go for some other positions?
Well,
or
I think, and while I can be flattered, I am toward the end of, the normal working years. And I would think, my immediate goal, I've got immediate goals, but some of the goals are longer term, longer tailed, aspirations. In terms of getting this office, into the situation that I think it was intended that it be, without, necessarily, denigrating what my predecessors have done, I would, every once in a while I find myself thinking, well, gee, we're probably supposed to do X, but over time we either stopped doing X or it wasn't expected of it. It wasn't expected. And then eventually we stopped doing it, and then it became kind of lost to obscurity. So I want to make sure that we have a department that is respected across state government, because that's what, at the end of the day, I am not an outward facing department. All of my focus is actually truly focused inward. Into government, but it's all of government. And I think that over time, we've been sort of shrunk, or not so much constrained, we've shrunk into the mandates.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, if you ever decide to run for anything else, you know that we are always going to support you. So, but I think,
but that's my real goal, is to make this office as effective as it can be.
It's important for you guys, like for the state officials, to know, like from I say this from my from the just any average person standpoint. I think these positions should always be represented by people who have experience in the area and the proper education for. Not everyone should be able to run. Not everyone should be able to, do certain things. Because these are, the job that you are doing is extremely important and it's very technical. And if you don't have the your accounting background and your legal background, then you won't be able to do it as good as you are doing right now. And then once you have enough time in this, it only makes sense for us to take advantage of that experience and then apply to a different position at some point. So, but that's what I was saying. So I wouldn't be too shy about it.
I tell people all the time, in fact, I'm looking at the calendar and it's like, this time last year, I was not thinking about I wasn't even thinking about running for office. Okay.
Yeah.
But in the course of a year, things change. And for that, I just tell people that you need to be open to what the universe presents. Okay.
That's very true, actually. So because there are other plans that we may not know that's already there. So
I hesitate to say precisely, but I try to remain open to what the universe offers to me.
I think that's a good good way to look at it. So now I do have one. I know we have a hard stop for you, and I don't want to take too much more time.
Hard, but go ahead.
One other thing that, like with these banking crisis happening right now, and immediately as we were also trying to get you on this, not necessarily knowing that there's maybe any jurisdiction over that or not, but is there anything that your department is able to do or is doing or responsible to do certain bank audits, or are you guys totally out of that?
We're not part of that because there's a whole separate department that does the bank examinations. Okay, they have a whole apparatus there to deal with that. But in terms of I guess as I was listening, I listened to Morning Joe as opposed to try to watch it, and they kept describing the recent events with Silicon Valley Bank and with Signature Bank in New York as some kind of a crisis. And one of the things I used to be was a banker, and more specifically a credit officer, and my portfolio oddly was other banks. Okay. So I'm really familiar with how banks ought to run. And so when I heard that the bank collapsed because they couldn't produce their deposits, I was kind of like, okay, that's what the discount window is for. Okay, leave that aside. But then as I learned that they had sold some treasury bonds, the safest investment in the world, by the way, at a loss, which then told me, because I know how this really works, that they didn't hedge that in any way. So it was, there's a lot of lingo for it, but basically they were kind of hanging out there hoping interest rates didn't go up when the Fed told everybody that they were going to be raising interest rates. So from my true perspective is that was a failure of management. Now, who was going to catch them in that? I couldn't tell you, but it's the kind of thing that typically isn't done.
Yeah.
And, as I understand, the Signature Bank in New York, I think it was their exposure in cryptocurrency. And you don't really want to know what I think of cryptocurrency because we don't have time for that today.
So I think we have to be open to it just because the world is going to change. And then we have to adapt. And I don't do much. I do learn how to do it. And I have an account. I have Bitcoin. So, and then it went I put like $7,000, right? So it went up to 15 and I didn't touch it. And it went down to 3,500. I'm looking at Sean because he was getting some of those updates for me. So, but the only reason I did it because I wanted to learn what it is and why there's a big, right now I'm down to 6,600. Which is up from where we started.
It's up from 35. It's only, I'm open to the concept, but because of the fluctuation in value, it's difficult.
Because it's so new, though, it's going to probably settle. It's going to require probably, and I'm not for it, or I'm not against it. I'm just, when there are new things happening, the only way that we have I feel like we have a better position by adapting the changes. And now, but I do see the concerns, and that's why maybe the regulation should start it earlier.
And that's probably true. I would suggest that it's not quite this. We're trying to apply. Let's just to use I think an appropriate analogy. We're trying to apply rotary dial regulation to a smartphone.
Yeah. Yep. So, but also remember, like the banking system changed a lot in the last 60, 70 years. So what we know, what it was, what money is, and the like how much money we have to have in the bank for bank to do certain things, all those regulations change. And I think money in a different way, it is already kind of artificial, even though it's paper,
It
right?
is. It's, I'm sitting here thinking it's like I probably only go get cash for when I have a known environment for not having cash.
Yeah,
Otherwise, I expect to not need it.
right. Yeah. So
And
in many countries, like I can tell you, like just from the country that I was born in, 4 years ago, the dollar exchange was 1 to 5. Right now, it's 1 to 19. So yeah, so the bank, like the money doesn't mean much. It's worse than the Bitcoin in that case. It's worse than the crypto, right? So the only way that makes us stable is one, the size of our economy, but the other thing is that having the global currency control of that, right? So that actually helps us a lot in many ways. But
it is a position that I think we should guard jealously. But I am not at all confused about why we are the global currency either.
very true. So I know you just started, and I can only imagine there's a lot of things going on because it's just by itself. Even if you know the job very well, or if you knew the office very well, it's still a lot of work. So it's going to be a lot for you. And so, are you in a good position right now that you feel comfortable? Okay, yes, we are able to do everything that we need to for the year 2023, and then preparing for the 24 from the state, from your office point.
I think we're in a good position to make the improvements that I think we need to make. Okay, we need to add staff, and so we're inching up on that. Okay, we we're making some adjustments to how we work with our vendors, so that somebody from the state auditor's office will be on the outside audit team, so to speak. Which will both enhance our training capabilities and our vendors are also having trouble staffing.
Yes,
okay, everyone's having trouble. So basically, if we're going to agree to sort of augment each other, basically is what we're trying to work out, and that's going to have, I think, some good positive outcomes for everybody. It'll be a lower bill from the vendor. We'll have better trained staff. The vendor will be able to liaise better, inside state government. I think it'll work really well for everyone. And I'm very excited about that for the next audit cycle. Because of the fiscal year, we're coming to an end. A lot of the work we're still trying to wrap up is from 2022, but next season, we're always auditing. There's always something going on. So we're going to be in a good position by the end of this calendar year for sure.
Very good. Well, I'm so glad that you are in the position that you are right now. So you are elected, and I know you are doing a great job, and you do even better and more. Knowing someone like you is in charge in the auditing department, actually, as a citizen here, like makes me feel like it gives us a peace of mind that, okay, so things are in good shape. It's going to be in good control. So, and I think that's important. And thank you for doing what you are doing. And
thank you very much.
It's always so. Like I'm having a lot of fun when I have these discussions. But when sometimes we know that there's the right chemistry, it's even more fun. And you are one of those people. And thank you for coming over and joining us.
Well, thank you so much. And I'd love to come back at some point in time.
Absolutely.
And I would be remiss if I did not shamelessly plug the fact that we are hiring with signing bonuses.
I will put the word out there. So thank you so much.
We'll get you the links to the jobs as soon as we can.
All right. Thanks again. So we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
All right, you take care. Bye-bye.
All right. So Sean Donovan, how are you doing? So I know we have very limited time left. But you have done a lot of work for this event, for the prep and meeting with me, and thank you for doing that.
Of course.
So we had some items that we were going to cover, but I think we'll do that next week.
I know we're running
It's kind
out.
of interesting that crypto kind of came up, which takes me to that global currency issue, right? So that's interesting that it's how important it is and how it's changing.
Yeah, that's what we had prepped for our global current event. We're touching on the currency and those exchange rates. So obviously not enough time today, unfortunately, to dive in depth, but we did have a great session, obviously, with the state auditor. So worth that sacrifice, bumping it to next week. But
we'll be back next week.
Yeah.
So all right. Well, thank you for joining us and watching us, and we'll be back with our Bariatric Friday in 3-4 minutes. By 3 p.m. we'll be there. So hopefully we won't have any technical issues this time. But until next week, stay safe, and we'll